I do love a long read and being able to settle in with the story and the characters, but sometimes it's just nice to have a book that you can finish in a day or take with you while you're commuting and know that it's still going to be just as profound and just as interesting. Because that's really what I look for when I'm reading a book. I want it to have an insight and to make me think, and usually about how to live and how to live well. And it might be within a particular theme, within love, relationships, friends, family, within work, within our hobbies, and just in general, the different aspects that make up our lives. That's, for me, what I look for in a book, and that's what these recommendations for short stories are going to be based on, and varying in length from about 100 pages down to 15 pages. And I think if you really want to see how deep a book can get, how deep a short story can get, then you need to look no further than Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy, or The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. And this is really the meditation on, was it a good life from the deathbed? Were the things that you pursued worth it? And there's a quote in it which I really like, which is, by society's standards, I thought that I was moving upwards, but in reality, I was moving down. And this is really the question of what is the barometer and what are we marking ourselves up against to decide whether we lived well? Is it society standards? Is it the majority opinion? Is that the right one? Or is it something that we have to discover and look in other places for? And this is maybe one of the best, but also I would say the coldest analyses of that. As if we compare The Death of Ivan Ilyich to War and Peace and Anna Karenina, we see that there's much more atmosphere there. There's much more feeling, and I mean, it makes sense. They're 1,000-page, 700-page books where we can really get to know the characters and have a bit more backstory to them. Whereas 90 pages, and to contain the same depth and, well, I mean, even more concentrated philosophically, it shows. And it's written more as though it were a philosophical book as opposed to a story, but interesting nonetheless. And we see that he did try and improve his status within society, Ivan Ilyich. He rushed into a marriage which he didn't really go into out of love, but it would make him look better in society, so he had to pursue it, or he felt that he had to pursue it. And then he decided that he just wanted the best things of the marriage and didn't want to put any responsibility in, and then complained when it was going badly. Who could guess why that was? So that wasn't working. He threw himself into his work. His work, he was always ambitious, he was always greedy, he always wanted more. And when he got that, when he was promoted, when he was doing better than his peers, he felt good. When he didn't, it ruined his whole life, and he brought that home, and it made his marriage even worse. So he turned away from those two, and he looked to the material. He looked at how he could furnish his house and make it more luxurious. And ironically, that's where he got injured, and that's how he ended up on his deathbed. So looking back, he really didn't have much that he could be proud of, that he could look back and think, yeah, that was worth it. That was my design. That wasn't society's impression upon me. And I really wanted to do it. However, in his final moments on his deathbed, he finds that there is something that he can do. He can make one last change, one last switch in mindset, and appease the people around him, make their lives a bit easier. And it's at that moment that he finds peace. However, the one thing that Leo Tolstoy doesn't really go into in this aspect, or in too much detail, there are some mentions of gambling and other allusions to vice, but really good examinations of vice, in my opinion, are Poe's The Black Cat, Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat, and Anton Chekhov's The Lady and the Lapdog, or The Lady and the Little Dog, depending on the translation. And they both focus on particular vices. So in Anton Chekhov's case, he's focusing on lust and pursuing momentary hedonic pleasure at the sacrifice of your long-term future. So sacrificing the future for the present. However, in The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe, we see how resentment can, after years and years of suppression, manifest itself in taking rather brutal revenge, not just upon the Black Cat, but also the people around the main character in that story. And the two aspects of commonality that we can see here between the two stories is this fact of allowing impulsive emotional reactions to dominate your life and not going under the presumption or the understanding that a single moment in time is enough to define your future. And it's for the reason that we live with that action. We don't reconcile with it, or the characters didn't reconcile it within the stories. And we see how this burden upon the conscience of the two characters who have committed the sin in these two books, it's devastating for them. I mean, one, it just destroys the two marriages that they're in and the relationships that they're in, but also it destroys their lives. It almost drives them insane. And in The Black Cat particularly, it takes the road of Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. as in wanting to be caught and wanting to betray yourself. And we can contrast this quite directly then into the next short story, which is The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And we have a very different character. We have a character who is incredibly stoic, incredibly resilient to any emotional turbulence that might take place, quite literally, on a fishing trip upon the sea. And no matter what happens, he's happy. Nothing can affect him. All his failings. He believes that this time I'm going to win. This time I'm going to get lucky. Or rather, not get lucky. But this time, because I rely on accuracy, because I rely on my skill, I'm going to be successful. He doesn't want to be lucky. He wants to earn it, and he wants to get it by right. And it's a commendable attitude, to have that fortitude as well, to be so resilient. And looking at this, you could say that all emotions are terrible. But it's clearly not true. And it's certainly not true in The Old Man and the Sea, because his very tender relationship with the young boy who he works with is something that sustains him. This loving and healthy relationship that he has, in part, is something that helps him continue. And it's not so much for his own benefit, but the relationship is predicated on the idea that the old man really wants to help the young boy. He wants to do what's best for him, even though it might not be best for the old man. Even though it might be more beneficial for the old man to take the young boy on the fishing trip with him. He says no. He says, listen to your parents. Go with the others, go with the ones who are more successful. I'll be fine by myself. He doesn't try and drag him down with him. He trusts in himself, he's resilient, and he can always bounce back. And that might be a very important lesson for George at the end of Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. Here, George really has gone through hell. And the thing is that he has had to be the one who literally pulls the trigger and literally causes the shattering ramifications upon his own life. And it's a terrible thing. But we have seen throughout the novel that George is resilient. He is selfless as the old man was in Hemingway's Old Man and the Sea. But will he overcome this? Will he overcome this moment where the story ends? Where he arguably did what he had to do. But can he still come back for that? It's one thing to do what we've had to do. But again, looking back even further to the two short stories by Chekhov and Poe, can we reconcile that with ourselves? Can we truly understand that we had to do it? And did we make the right decision that we did have to do it? Not that just it was a whim, and it was something that was overruled by emotions. Personally, I don't believe that it was in The Mice and Men, and I think it's very hard to argue that it was the case. It clearly does play out to be quite a cold, rational decision, which are not always the best decisions, but in this case, perhaps it was. Perhaps there was no alternative in this situation, particularly when you have certain malicious actors who only want your downfall. Malicious actors who are only driven by greed and spite, and they don't want to understand. And these malicious actors continue into the next short story, which is The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare, and the character of Shylock within that, who again is greedy, who again is spiteful, and is willing to put someone under the knife and to kill them just because of their greed. They want the repayment of a loan, but it comes to a point where they don't care about the money anymore. Even if they were offered more money, they wouldn't take it. They want justice, and justice in their own eyes done. But really it's out of spite. And we also see the friendship that we saw in Mice and Men and The Old Man and the Sea, as Antonio is saved by his friends and saved by their girlfriends, who come in at the very end and save him from the knife of Shylock. And while that saves Antonio, it doesn't save Shylock. He's still the same person that he was, and he finds that he has lost everything because of his character, because of his obsession with the financial, and his obsession with getting what he deems to be his justice, and his just desserts. And it's a tricky thing, because we all have a sense of justice. We all have a sense of what is right and what is wrong, and we're very emotionally attached to that. It's very hard to deal with it, to deal with something that goes against our idea of justice, our idea of morality. What should be, not what is. And yet in some cases, it's not so much as Shylock, because Shylock really is pushed to the extreme. And so while it is useful to have these warnings, it can be much harder when we get down into minutiae of it, and to work out what are the actual best ways to live. It's all well and good looking at the negatives, looking at what we should not do. But what should we do? The Old Man and the Sea provides one answer, and another answer is in The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And this is one of my favourite books in terms of how to look at the world. I just think it's so touching and such a beautiful story. And The Little Prince is really an excellent character. And there is, yes, an element of the vices that he finds on his travels. The drunk, the businessman who's obsessed with money, the king who's obsessed with power. But what I particularly enjoy about The Little Prince, and why it's a book that I constantly reread, is because it's meditations on beauty and about the small things in life and finding them. Spending time just contemplating, just appreciating what is there, and particularly the relationships that we have. Because sometimes we can wonder what's so special about our lives and the people in it. But the fundamental reason that they're special, that The Little Prince puts forward, is because we've chosen them. It's because we have decided that they're special. And that means in our little corner of the world, wherever we are, that they are special. And they are and can be the most important thing in the world. But it's too often forgotten. And we keep expecting to stumble upon that which is special, the one, the perfect partner, the perfect job, the perfect passion. But maybe it's on us, and maybe it's just for us to make the decision that they are the one, they will be the perfect partner, that will be the perfect job, that will be the perfect hobby, perfect passion, as we're going to make it work, as we're going to take the time, invest it, and looking back we can say that because of all that time we've taken and put into it, and made it into the right decision. And so we're not waiting, we're actively seeking. And it might not always fall into place the first time of asking. After all, we're not totally malleable. And if it really isn't something we're interested in, no amount of effort will ever change it. But there is no perfection out there waiting for us. It's just for us to make it so. And I think that's a beautiful message. If only Shylock had read The Little Prince, all these other characters, who knows how they would have turned out. And if all of those are still too long, then I'll leave you with these 6 words. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. See you in the next one.